All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack some truly fascinating source material that takes a totally fresh and honestly a pretty mind-blowing look at some of the oldest writings in human history. We're going to dive deep into the intricate, hidden cross-references woven all throughout biblical texts. And look, whether you grew up hearing these stories every single Sunday or you're approaching them literally for the very first time, the sheer literary craftsmanship happening here is absolutely stunning. We're going to be treating this text not just as history or theology, but as a massive, centuries-spanning masterpiece of interconnected storytelling. You know, it's a pretty compelling thought, right? What if the most famous stories in the Bible are actually hiding a completely different message? The source material we're looking at today treats these ancient texts like a brilliant literary puzzle that's just waiting to be solved. We usually tend to read these narratives as isolated, standalone events, David and Goliath, Jesus walking on the water, the birth in Bethlehem. But the evidence actually suggests that the authors were playing this massive game of connect the dots. And by spotting these connections, we can unlock a completely different, much deeper layer of meaning. So let's start with our first theme, hidden parallels and foreshadowing, or what we can call echoes across the centuries. The source reveals these deep narrative echoes that bounce across hundreds of years, specifically linking the famous heroes of the Old Testament directly with the life of Jesus in the New Testament. Now picture two of the most famous water-based miracles in history. You've got Moses parting the Red Sea, and you've got Jesus walking on water. At first glance, one is this massive national escape, and the other just seems like a flashy superhuman display, right? But look closer at the details. Both events take place in the pitch dark of night. Both events involve the stretching out of a hand to conquer the chaotic, raging waters. The author isn't just giving us random details. They are deliberately framing Jesus' actions to mirror Moses, basically showing him as a new deliverer, holding back the chaotic forces of death. And this connection gets even wilder when you look at the exact words being used. When the disciples are absolutely terrified out there on the boat, Jesus tells them, "It is I, do not be afraid." But here's the catch. In the original Greek translation of the Old Testament, the phrase, "do not be afraid," which was spoken by Moses at the Red Sea, is tied to the exact same phrasing. And "it is I" literally translates back to "I am," which is the exact name God gave himself in the book of Exodus. So Jesus isn't just performing some magic trick on a lake, he's using the literal language and imagery of the Exodus to claim total dominion over the chaos of the sea. Let's look at another one, a really brilliant rule of three highlighted by the source. Think about the ancient Israelites wandering the wilderness for 40 years, compared to Jesus fasting in the wilderness for 40 days. In the desert, Israel famously failed three massive tests. They grumbled for food, they tested God's patience, and they fell into major idolatry with the whole golden calf incident. Well, when Satan tempts Jesus, he uses those exact three avenues. Jesus attempted to turn stones to bread, to put God to the test by jumping, and to bow down and worship Satan. And how does Jesus answer? By quoting directly from the book of Deuteronomy, specifically from the chapters that detail Israel's failures. He succeeds in the exact same spots where the entire nation of Israel failed. Moving on to section 2, decoding the historical context. Here we'll look at farming, commerce, and ancient culture. Sometimes the secret to understanding a really bizarre biblical phrase isn't some huge theological mystery. It's actually just a super practical one. Understanding ancient daily life completely flips how we read these stories. Take that famous phrase from the New Testament, "do not be unequally yoked." Today, people mostly use this when talking about dating or marriage, but honestly, without the ancient farming background, it completely loses its punch. A yoke is a heavy wooden beam looped around the heads of two oxen so they can pull a plow. Now, if you pair a really strong, tall ox with a weak, short one, the weaker ox just can't keep up. And what happens? The team literally just walks in circles, or they stop completely. It's a highly practical reality. When opposing worldviews or foundational goals clash, progress halts. Eventually, someone is going to have to compromise their path. So, keeping that context in mind, let's ask a really interesting question. Why did Jesus specifically cleanse the Gentile courts in the temple? We all know the story, right? Jesus flipping tables, cracking a whip, absolute chaos. But why did he do it right there? If he was just angry about people not being holy enough, wouldn't he march right into the inner, holiest parts of the temple? Instead, he orchestrates this entire massive scene out in the outermost rings of the complex. Well, the answer comes down to one staggering number, 255,000. That is the number of lambs that the ancient historian Josephus recorded as being sold at a single Passover festival. Just imagine the noise and the smell of that. Because of this massive, booming commercial enterprise, the merchants set up their money-changing tables and their livestock pens in literally the only place they had room, the outer courts. But here's the kicker. Those outer courts were the only place the non-Jewish people, the Gentiles, were legally allowed to go and pray. So this rampant, out-of-control capitalism was physically blocking the outsiders from their only place of worship. Jesus wasn't just mad about capitalism in a church. He was fiercely defending the outsider's right to have access to God. All right, that brings us to Section 3, Solving Scriptural Contradictions, where we'll look at scribes, errors, and ancient texts. Okay, so the Bible is an ancient document that was copied by hand over thousands of years. And naturally, sometimes things got a little messy. Here the source acts like a historical detective to solve a pretty glaring textual contradiction. We all know David killed Goliath, right? But if you go read 2 Samuel chapter 21, it flat out says a man named Elhanan killed Goliath. But then, if you flip over to 1 Chronicles, it says Elhanan killed Lami, the brother of Goliath. So, which is it? Did David kill the giant, or did Elhanan? Well, look at the original Hebrew text. In 2 Samuel, we have the word et, which is basically just a grammatical marker. But in 1 Chronicles, we have I, which translates to brother of. And visually, those two ancient Hebrew words look almost identical. So the source outlines this completely fascinating and honestly super relatable scribal error theory. Just imagine a really tired ancient scribe copying this massive text by candlelight. He looks at the word I, brother of, and accidentally writes down eat. Instantly, the phrase brother of is just completely erased from that sentence. On top of that, the Hebrew word for Bethlehemite looks and sounds incredibly similar to the name Lami. So the conclusion here is incredibly satisfying. David really did kill Goliath, and then years later, his loyal soldier Elhanan fought another battle and killed Goliath's unnamed brother, Lami. A simple slip of the pen by a tired guy created a mystery that lasted for centuries. Next up, Section 4, Secret Symbols of the Messiah. We're diving into astronomical timing and prophetic gifts. The source highlights some jaw-dropping precision and symbolism when it comes to the timeline and the details of Jesus' life, from day one all the way to the very end. I mean, we've all heard about the wise men bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh to the baby Jesus. But these weren't just random, expensive baby shower gifts. They were incredibly specific prophetic symbols outlining his entire life's mission. Gold was the universal tribute you gave to a king. Frankincense was the very specific incense burned daily in the temple, representing the role of the high priest, bridging the gap between God and humanity. But myrrh? Myrrh is the shocking one. It was an embalming oil used for dead bodies. This gift predicted from the very beginning that this child's ultimate purpose was to be a savior who would have to die. And speaking of that death, it was calculated with what looks like astronomical precision. The source cites research cross-referencing the Jewish calendar month of Nisan 14 to trace this incredible timeline. Jesus' crucifixion happens in the late afternoon. But what else is happening in Jerusalem at that exact precise moment? The Passover festival. And at twilight, right as the sun dips below the horizon, the priests are sacrificing the unblemished Passover lambs in perfect unison to commemorate Israel being saved from Egypt. The texts are showing us that Jesus' death aligned perfectly to the exact day and nearly the exact hour of those massive lamb sacrifices. And his burial was just as staggering. There's this ancient prophecy in the book of Isaiah that stated the Messiah would be assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Well, Jesus died between two criminals, but he was buried in a brand new, extremely expensive tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea. Plus, a man named Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes to anoint the body. To put that into perspective for us today, the modern estimated value of that much spice is roughly $1.4 million. It was a burial fit for absolute royalty, quietly fulfilling a 700-year-old prophecy without anyone really noticing at the time. And finally, Section 5, the message to outsiders. We'll be looking at Rahab, Elijah, and the Syrophoenician woman. This next part takes one of the most jarring, uncomfortable interactions in the entire gospel and completely turns it on its head, proving that when you actually understand the literary puzzle, everything shifts. Okay, so a Gentile woman, a Syrophoenician, begs Jesus to heal her daughter. And Jesus seemingly insults her right to her face, saying it isn't right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. It sounds terrible, right? Really racist and totally out of character for him. But the source points out this absolute game changer of a linguistic nuance. Jesus did not use the common Greek word kuna, which meant a rabid, feral street dog, which was the standard harsh racial slur of the day. Instead, he used a diminutive form, kunarion, which actually referred to a little puppy or a beloved household pet. But the literary connections go so much deeper than just a word choice. The Gospel of Matthew specifically calls this woman a Canaanite. Well, who else was a famous Canaanite? Rahab, an outsider who showed radical faith and got completely grafted into the main lineage of Israel. Furthermore, this woman lived near Zarephath. That happens to be the exact geographical location where the ancient prophet Elijah saved a Gentile widow and resurrected her child using just a prophetic word. The author here is brilliantly connecting all the dots for us. This woman isn't just some random interruption on the road. She fits perfectly into a historical pattern of faithful outsiders who boldly demand God's grace. So the mind-blowing conclusion of this whole interaction is completely reframed. By using the specific word for a household pet, a creature that fundamentally belongs inside the master's home, Jesus wasn't insulting her at all. He was actually validating her incredible faith. He was basically telling her that because of her radical trust, she was already inside the house of God. She wasn't some feral outsider begging for street scraps. She was already part of the family. It is this profound, beautiful statement about the inclusion of absolutely everyone into the divine plan. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. If a single tiny word change regarding a dog, or a totally practical farming analogy about a yoke, or the exact hour of an afternoon execution can completely rewrite how we understand these stories, how many other literary puzzles are just hiding right there in plain sight within these ancient texts? The source material shows us for sure that these aren't just simple fables for kids. They are deeply layered, brilliantly constructed masterpieces of literature. It absolutely makes you want to look a whole lot closer at the texts you thought you already knew, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep asking those big questions.